I want to talk about the recruiting aspect of this, Ryan, because we were talking about the schedule, and it'll get tougher in the coming years. And Oregon's got big expectations this year. I said earlier this week, I think that's a good thing because it means Oregon's getting the respect they deserve. They're getting that sort of recognition, and it helps when you're trying to build a program that is a perennial top 5 national title contender, Big Ten title contender every year. These sorts of things. It's not the whole list, or it's not the whole ball game in that sense. But you see the other programs having that sort of hype, and I understand fans that have that apprehension, but I like it. I'm here for it. Part of the reason that Oregon's at that level is because of the way that Dan Lanning has shifted the recruiting expectations for the Ducks. He brings in a top 10 class. He brings in the best class ever in his second season. It feels like that trend is going to continue. Did you ever think in all your years of Oregon fandom that you would see Oregon out recruiting places like Notre Dame or Texas or LSU?
Not really. Again, we talked about being on the edge of the continent. It's very remote out here. It's us and the birds. And yeah, no, Dan Lanning is just a different cat, man. I loved his interviews through Media Day. The Big Ten has done a great job as well. They just went out here with Yogi Roth and everything, and they had their time where they gave the interviews with the coaches and everything else. And there's a lot of coach speak. Don't get me wrong. But Dan Lanning is genuine. He's a genuine guy. And I think there's a lot to be said that there's guys who are just not that genuine in this profession. And there's a lot of guys who are, I don't want to be insulting, but, they just come across as not genuine. And they come across as maybe not that interested in their child, more than they're interested in their own success and their own future. I think the two go hand in hand. I think the Dan Lanning, the insight into that relationship with that recruit, talking about they were concerned he was going to leave. Would you make a video? Sure, let's do it. Hey, he sends the video to the mom before he sends it out to millions of people to watch, on Twitter, which we all, of course, did. Grass is damn green, that whole statement. We've talked about this. That's a genuine statement. That's not something that's a sales pitch. That's not something that is going to come across as something that is superficial or surface level. There's depth here. And he also puts a gigantic premium on getting coaches who have the same message and coaches that are dog recruiters as well. I mean, look at Coach Samp, right? Running back coach comes in here, Coach Locke leaves, Samp comes in, and immediately they're talking about him being one of the best recruiting coaches in the country, in the state of Texas, where we know have good running backs historically. And so they've got good
everything in Texas. And by the way, you can't bring up Rashad Samples and not mention the DeCorian Moore connection, because that was 100%. The immediate tinfoil hat for a lot of Oregon fans, and he helped bring that to reality.
Absolutely. And I think that also goes to show the level of relationships that coaches have outside of their position group, right? So you have these coaches, they're working the recruiting trail. There's a bunch of people, they're all on board. I think they make a real a concentrated effort to put on their best authentic self. And I think there's other people who put on a show, a staged kind of a thing. Oh, we got the Lamborghinis. We're going to have the pictures, Brian Kelly on the thing dancing with the guy. And stuff. You don't see that out here. And then when you do see...
Well, I mean, there are recruiting photos.
No. You don't see Dan Lanning dancing behind the guy.
He's just taking...
that felt just
he's just taking a photo
to me. That just felt corny to me, and it had to feel corny to other people. Maybe even the guy dancing in the front. I just think that Dan Lanning comes off. One of the things we talked about on the West Coast is there are people who are just too laid back, right? People are just out here. We don't really care about this stuff, whatever else. And then you get the East Coast people, and they're just too driven. They're too focused. They're too, well, what do you have in the Midwest? You have that beautiful blend. And we always talk about those Midwest values. Those Midwest values come across very, very authentic and pure. And I think Dan Lanning is just a different cat. He said it over and over. He said, Oregon is different. We're going to do things different. We're gonna want to push the envelope, but we're not going to push it in a way that people don't feel comfortable with. And when you see these recruits, when they come out, they want to be a part of a team. They want to be a part of a family. And I think Dan Lanning represents that.
The Oregon recruiting conversation at a national level very quickly gets to NIL. And I think my favorite comment of the summer, not of the year, because that would be the grass is damn green in Eugene, but
Yes.
maybe at a very close number two was when Lanning was on, I think it was the Pat McAfee show. And he was asked about, the NIL and all this sort of stuff. And Kirby Smart, I was in the room when Kirby Smart took a shot at Dan Lanning and my ears perked up. I was like, where did that come from? What did Dan do to you? Come on. Like, what are we doing here? And he was talking about unlimited NIL and the big budget and everything. And Lanning went on the Pat McAfee show and basically said, yeah, it's amazing. Kirby's brought in the number one class 2 or 3 years in a row with no NIL. It's incredible. It's amazing. And I think that's honestly a great way to phrase it is, yes, Oregon has NIL dollars. They are, if you were to have, 5 tiers in the Power 4 conferences of NIL or 3 tiers or whatever, however many you would create, Oregon is at the top of tier 1. They're not alone. They're not sitting at the mountaintop. Look at what Texas is doing. Yeah. Ohio State, by the way, had took some flack from flack comments, whatever you want to call it, from Matt Rule at Nebraska, saying, yeah, I mean, they're, putting X amount of dollars in here. And then the number got floated around that it was $20 million plus in NIL, which is what a lot of tier 1 schools can put into their rosters with NIL dollars. Oregon's in that sort of range. But this notion, I think it's just Oregon is an easy target because of Nike and Phil Knight. This notion that Oregon's like the only school investing buku bucks in NIL. What do you think that Ohio State roster costs to put together? Because the estimates are over 20 million, and I 100% think that's accurate.
I totally agree. I mean, I remember when the first year of the NIL, Ryan Day said we need 13 million a year to keep this thing up. That was just 2 years ago. Now it's over 20 or something. I mean, there's different levels of interest in providing for your football team. And we know this. Oregon and USC were the only 2 teams in the Pac-12 that even had a profit in their athletic department. So the ideology that there is investment out here, there's an ideology that there's things that are working well out here, and you can provide that. I think, obviously, we know that the Washington State, Oregon State thing has a lot to do with the money. Washington's got tons of money, but they don't really utilize it the same way that Oregon does. Oregon has a hype right now and a buzz right now. And, not to get political, but, when you talked about the conspiracy theorists of Oregon, there's a bunch of conspiracy theorists all of the time about politics, right? Who's behind it? The dark money. Where's
the Illuminati?
The Illuminati. They're just buying a championship. They're just buying a Senate seat or whatever. Well, that stuff goes on, but Oregon hasn't yet bought a national championship. They're still at 0. Everybody reminds us of this. Oregon is just trying to be competitive with the rest of the group. And I do think there's an old money, young money conversation where they're frustrated with it. They're like, who's the new kid? And Ohio State's been doing this for years. Michigan's been doing this for years. But now Oregon joins the conversation. And I do think that there's a little bit of pushback there. I think that historically, Oregon has to do something different to get recruits out here. If that's pay them more, that's going to have to be paying more. We used to do stuff where we would have guarantees where they'd bring the families out for certain games or something because it was hard to get kids out here and say, hey, we're going to recruit. We're going to have to build in some sort of incentive. Even when they weren't doing the money and NIL thing, they were still trying to get families out here because they were saying, hey, well, maybe we can bring your family out to a game or 2 or 3 games a year. That was part of the deal as well. Well, now, obviously, that's all built in. But I do think that Oregon has still a road to climb. I don't know what the exact numbers are, but I know they're not near the very top of NIL money. And to be able to still be competitive, you got to be right with everybody else. I know they obviously are higher than most. Like you just said, there's different tiers to it. But I do think that there's a pretty good gap between the highest end team paying out that money and where Oregon is. And I don't know the numbers off the top of my head. But
well, I think Oregon is one of the top 5-10 NIL roster teams in the country. I have no problem saying that is likely the case based on a variety of informational sources. But to pretend that Oregon is somehow light years away, you know what SMU can pay kids with their collective? A lot of money. You know what Ohio State's got? They've got a lot. You think Alabama's NIL coffers? You think Georgia's NIL collective is just empty? You think the well's running dry and they're looking like UCLA's athletic department budget when they went to the Big Ten because they were facing a shortfall of many, many millions of dollars? Like I've always found that to be very disingenuous the way the Oregon gets discussed
It's
in the NIL
easy.
landscape.